Hey, good morning, Wednesday, March 22nd. Welcome to everybody. Glad you all can make it. So the plan for today, we're in the middle of talking about guizero, and the plan is to show you enough sample programs and discuss enough concepts that either you're comfortable doing what you need to do, or you have a good idea to know where to go to find out that information. So we're going to explore several things. In particular, today, I want to explore more details about event handlers, because unless you're trying to use guizero to create a poster that never changes, there are event handlers in your future, and they come in several different flavors. Now, we know that event handlers are really functions, so you have to be comfortable with the topic of functions and how they're used as event handlers. So a lot about that today. Want to take another or a more in-depth look at how to use boxes as a layout technique. It's one of two that I know of in guizero. The other is a grid layout, which after learning how to use it, I wasn't happy with it. It was just difficult to maintain and always had some surprises. Particularly if you want to add something into the middle of the layout, things got really dicey. So I gave up on that and went over to boxes, never to go back again, in my mind, to grid layouts. If you want to explore it, please do. So on the topic of exploring, I can't stress enough that this website is your friend. It should be bookmarked, in my opinion. You should get used to using it. When you get stuck on things, use it for exploring. As I said before, this is the website that was developed by the people who authored guizero. So, and I think they do a pretty good job keeping it up to date. One of the things you might be interested in here is keeping track of versions. And I think this version came out after our class started. So if you haven't updated guizero to 1.4.0, you're missing some of the latest and greatest. And then, of course, they describe here what was changed. Speaking of event handlers, this is an interesting thing under events. We're now given something called key_code. Now we're going to look at a demo program later that talks about key click events, and I can show you where that fits in if you remind me. If not, someday when you're trying to use it, it will sneak up on you about why am I pressing the key and not seeing what key I'm pressing. And the answer typically is it's an unprintable key. Well, why are there unprintable keys on your keyboard? There's lots of them. The space bar, the shift key, the enter key, the backspace key, et cetera, et cetera. Lots of these keys are unprintable. So key code is an answer to that. You could get to it in the past, but you had to dig deeper. Now they've brought it up to the forefront. And actually, there's another attribute that goes along with it that I think they should have brought up. And I don't remember if it's called key description. That's not it. Anyway, think about it if you're thinking about key click event handlers. So that's one thing you find here. Notice they're kind of down to pretty much an update a year. So I would say development has slowed down on this. But if you take a look backwards over here, this has been around for a while. It looks like this stops at 2017. And they spent a considerable amount of time in 0.something releases. That means that we're still working on it. You know, it works as far as we know, but we know we have more work to do. So in 2019, they actually started with a 1.0, and now we're up to 1.4. Most important thing here probably is this tab, because these are the guizero widgets. There ain't no more at the time being. So if you want to learn about any guizero widget, this is where to go. Using guizero is also important, and we'll be spending some time here today. We talked about multiple windows last time. Here's a section about it. We will talk about events. Here's a section about it. Colors always comes into play, something here, images, lots of good stuff there. Recipes I haven't used a lot, but it's got some basic building blocks on putting things together. And as I said last time, book has a PDF with 10 worked out examples. Rather game oriented, but that's okay. So I thought we'd start with just a quick look at my solution to the last breakout exercise. And I think that all of you who are here live have participated in this. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, cool. So just to kind of show you my approach to it, because I'm convinced that creating these guizero programs is a matter of following a development pattern. First part of the pattern is, what are you trying to do? If you don't have a picture of what you're trying to do, then it's really hard to succeed. So this thing said, well, we're going to provide a weather forecast, and you're familiar with this from things like the temperature notification, I think it was, where you break things up into ranges. You make sure all the ranges are covered. And in this case, we're going to show text in some color. So that's step number one. Step number two, and this is in the way again. Okay. Step number two is, what do you think this is going to look like? Now, whether it's a tan or beige background, no biggie. But we do have to plan for what our display is going to look like. Primarily, we start by going for user interface, going to do what it needs to do. But then we also talk about a little bit of user experience. Try to make it not but ugly. Don't put orange letters on a red background. Make sure the text is bigger enough. Make sure you've got some horizontal and vertical spacing. So pretty straightforward. A text field that says enter temperature below, text box to enter temperature, a button to drive the event handler, and a weather forecast will appear down at the bottom. Next step, ignore the event handlers for the time being. Just worry about getting the layout done. And, oh, yeah, importantly, this may take you some time to do, but you need to know where you're going. So my recommendation is do this in pencil and paper and eraser. Just make a quick and dirty sketch so you know what it looks like more or less, and then decide what needs a name. Well, this needs a name because I have to read data. This needs a name because I have to put my forecast here. This may or may not need a name, but it certainly needs an event handler tied to it because this is the action. So with that information in hand, then let's create the layout. And this gets to be rather routine. The more you do it, the easier it is. But the more you do it, the more likely it is you're trying to create something complex, so that you're going to spend more time doing it because of the complexity. And there's also an opportunity in here to make it look pretty. So let's make this a little bigger. And virtually always, in terms of the layout, we're going to start with an APP widget. Where you remember from last time, there can only be one of these in a program. And this is the only widget that doesn't specify a master or a parent. Why? Because it is the top of the hierarchy. It is the root. It is the parent, the ultimate parent. It can have 0 or more children, but each child only has one parent. And this is a one window application, so there is no other windows. Just to review from last time quickly, if you need to create separate windows, that's what the window widget is about, capital W, and that's all explained very nicely in the guizero tutorial. So when we create the APP widget, we have the opportunity to do some stuff. We have the opportunity to set a title if we wish, set height and width if we wish, and set a background color if we wish. What's that all about? What are your options? Hover over APP and you'll see exactly what it's about. And you'll see the ones that we didn't do. We didn't specify layout and we didn't specify visible. We're happy with the defaults. More information down here about what they briefly show up here. Usually the text size is a little small, so I usually bump it up to 16 or 18. That's something modest. Then I decide that I want a little room at the top of my display. I don't want my widget glued to the top. So I create a box widget anonymously and invisibly. But that doesn't keep it from taking up 20 pixels of height at the top of the display. Therefore, it provides a margin at the top. Underneath it, I'm just going to put some text. I'm never going to change it, so I don't need to name it. Here's the text box. Its parent is APP, which makes sense because there's no other place to display the widget. It is of type text box, and its name is TBX_temperature. So that's my naming convention that says 3 letters for what it is, TBX, underscore, and what its purpose is. Its purpose is to get the temperature. Another spacer. Another push, no, not another push button. The one and only push button, where in APP. The text I decided was going to have 2 lines in it. So that's why the \n is there. Show on the first line, forecast on the second, which will make the button squarer as opposed to more rectangular. What is, okay, let's just finish this, then we'll come back here. Another spacer and a place for the weather forecast that at this point just says weather forecast. So that's my layout. That creates this. If I never enter anything, I can look at this forever. Nothing will change. Boring. So what I want to do is I want to tie an event handler to the button. And that is this. Command equals show underscore forecast. I can click on it and look for a color match, or I can be cool and hold down the control key, hover over it, click on it, and it will automatically take me to the place where it's defined, and vice versa. If I hold control here, it'll go back to where it's used. If it's used in multiple lines, it will tell you that it found multiple things. So if and when I hit the button, this is what's going to happen. I need to know the temperature. Well, that comes out of the text box, but it's not the widget, it's the value of that widget. So remember that value is a property, and you can get it if it's on the left, if it's on the right side of an equals, and you can set it if it's on the left side of an equals. So here we are just setting a regular old variable called temperature. We're going to read the value, for better or worse, because it's a text box. That value will be a string, whether you think it is or not, it will be. If you want to treat it as a number with a decimal, then you need a float function. Now we get down to what we've done before. Here's a whole structure, a decision structure. And since the temperature can only be one thing, using if else is the way to go. It's not multiple ifs. If you find a match, you're done. And I've got my range covered. Less than 30, 30 to up to 45, 45 up to 70, 70 up to 90, and if it's above 90, this is what's left. Throw a little thing in there. Well, what am I going to do? I decided to use some variables because it's simple enough. Here I have a forecast, which is a string, and a target color, which is also a string. So if I set these up in every case, I'm covered. Then when I get to the bottom, I can go back to the TXT widget and not change the widget, but change its value. For what? Well, an F string. And the F string says today's forecast is for that kind of weather. So good example of an F string. Okay, extra credit question. Why did I choose double quotes to delimit the F string? Can you see why that might have been important?
Quotes. Choose the F string.
Any clues?
You've already used the single quotes in other sections, so
I have. You were so close.
I know.
Okay, so it's today's. Today's has an apostrophe S.
There it is. Yep.
And that's a single quote. So if I'm going to put a single quote within my string, I need double quotes to surround it, or I need to go to backslash characters. Similarly, if I had double quotes within my string, I would use single quotes to surround it, but that's what I usually do. I usually use single quotes. Then I'm going to set up using a different property. Here I set the value property. Here I set the color property. I've already figured out in every case what the color is going to be. And that's it. Any questions or surprises? We're good? Okay.
Good here.
Great. Anybody else? All righty. So let's go back for a reason and talk about our guizero demo programs, at least look at a few of them. I am happy to tell you that if you go into module 10 and you go down to the bottom, that actually continuing through this morning, I've updated this link. So this link now has 5 programs and a little description of what each is. Looks like I missed a space over here, but whatever. So if I click on these, I do expect the code to show up in a window, and you can copy this code and do whatever you want with it. I don't think you can change this because you don't have permission. Literally, Google Drive permission. You have my permission, but certainly you can copy this and make modifications or use this as a reference. So those are all there, but I'm going to look at them in PyCharm. And what I wanted to refresh your memory with on this program is, first of all, what does it look like? Well, it's got 4 blinking lights. They go from an assigned color to black, and they do so after a second delay, 1 second delay. So layout, pretty boring. An APP, a text, a waffle that's 1x4, a call to a function called lights on, and then app.display. Okay, so lights on. Lights on says, run the value of I between 0 and 3, 1 less than 4, and then go to that I element of the waffle. So waffles are cool because each cell in it has an index, and that index has an X value or 2 indexes or a coordinate, and that is an X value that comes first and then a Y value that comes second. So I'm going to set the color of that cell to the same index in this list. In other words, red goes first, followed by yellow, green, and blue. This, if we didn't label it before, is an event handler. It's a time-based event handler. It has to be hung on to something, and APP seems like a reasonable thing to hang it on to. It always works. So it says, when you execute line 18, which is going to happen really quickly because I call this function, register with a time-based event handler the function lights underscore off, which becomes an event handler, but don't execute it for 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second. And then stop. Your job is done. So guizero now has to keep track of what to do and when. And after 1 second, it will run this function where we go through the loop again, go through the same waffle cells again, but turn them all to black. And now we do another APP dot after in a second, go to lights on. So what I've done here is I've created a loop. Initially, I call lights on calls lights off calls lights on. That's called blinking. So that's one way of doing this. And it was the way that I conceived it when I originally created this. Any question about what's going on here? Are we good?
Good here.
Okay. Let's take another approach at a similar problem. And while we're doing that, let's explore something new. A couple of things that are new, because new is good. Okay, let me just show you what this does, which will kind of help, I think. Now you're supposed to go, ooh. Well, it's a waffle. It has 5 cells in it. And if you notice, the colors rotate from the top to the bottom. And when they get to the bottom, they come back to the top. Pretty slick, huh? So that's what we're going to explore now. There's not a lot of lines of code here. Here's my whole main. So there's not a lot going on, but a lot goes on because some of it's magic. Okay, no text, so I don't have to worry about text size. So I need to create an APP window, and I'm going to call it rotating lights, and I know what width I want. And let's talk about the height a little later. I did a little bit of math to figure out the height, which I didn't do in my previous example, and set the background to black. Here I'm going to create a waffle. It's going to be a single column, so its width is 1, and its height is also going to be a calculated value, leading me to believe that this new variable, num of colors, is playing a key role here. So we got to figure out what that is. I've set a dimension of the circles. They're circles because dot equals true. I've set padding to get some padding around everything. And now I'm going to use the other time-based event handler that's available. And it's app.repeat. Repeat keeps on calling the function rotate underscore colors every second. So after is a delay and a one-time execution. Repeat is a delay and then multiple executions of the same cycle. If you're the kind of person that worries about things like, how do I ever stop this? There is a way of canceling things that are scheduled, time scheduled. That's for another day. So we only have 2 things to look at here. What does the event handler look like? And what global variables or constants do I have? Oh, and there's something else to look at. What am I going to import? And here is the what's the right word? Well, the surprise, the new trick in the book. And it's a relatively new trick for me also. Something that I kind of thought, why can't there be something that does rotates? And the answer is there is. It comes from a Python library called collections, and it imports a feature called, properly pronounced, deck. I pronounced it DQ, and oh, thank you. I pronounced it DQ, but it's not. It's deck. Well, what does deck stand for? It stands for double-ended queue. And it's more intelligent than a list and a tuple because internally there are pointers to the previous and next elements. A singly linked list points to the next element. A doubly linked list points forwards and backwards, making it very easy to take something, add something or take something out from the beginning, end, or middle. So if I have to take something out of the middle of a list, it's not pretty. There's a lot of work to do because it's got to reorganize the whole thing. Queues, double-ended or single-ended, are more flexible. But that's not why I use them. I use them because if I do have a deck, I have a rotate function that goes along with it. So how do we get one of these deck things? Well, we create a tuple because there's no parentheses that makes this a tuple. And now I decided to get smart. And now that I have my data, and I'm not going to change it, I put it all in caps. I can create another global constant called num of colors and just tell it it's the length of this tuple, which will never change. Once I know this, now I can use it here for the range. I can use it here in a little calculation to size up my APP window. And I can use it here to get the right number of rows in my one column. And that means that if for some reason I change my mind, magic happens. My window is shorter, my margins are still good, and I only see 4 dots, where before I was seeing 5. So that's the benefit of having a global constant to give you the length of a list or a tuple. But the darn thing doesn't rotate. So what good is it? Well, it's good because I can create a new object. And if I hover over it, it will tell me that is an object of type deck. And it will tell me that the elements in it are strings. So that's good. And I can use the deck function that I imported here, pass to it some kind of a data collection. So it doesn't care if it's a list, a tuple. I haven't tried it, but I assume it would work with a set, and I don't know what it would do with a dictionary. But certainly, an itemized list of things, lowercase l, you can make into a deck. And that's cool because now I can call the rotate function. And I don't have to write a rotate function, and I don't want to write a rotate function. I have to move indexes. If I get to the bottom, I got to go back to the top. Why would I do that if these decks, which I get access to by doing this, line 10, why would I do that if I can create a deck and rotate it? So the only thing left here is a for loop. And this is not a very surprising loop. It says, using a local variable index, go through the integers based on range number of colors, which is right now 4. So that will generate 0, 1, 2, 3. That must be 4 elements. And then go to the correct place in the waffle. So waffle indexes also start at 0. Cool. So since we created a 1x4, our valid index numbers are 0, 1, 2, 3. Change the color property of that cell, because waffles are smarter than they look. You can individually set the color of any individual cell. You can also set the shape, so you can change circles to squares and back again. And you can also set up an event handler on it, which is a topic for a little later. How do I know what to change this property to? Well, as always with an assignment statement, you look on the right side of the equals and you say, go into your color queue, which is a deck, and pull out the index 0, 1, 2, 3. When you're done, rotate your deck. And why do we do this again? We do this again because there's an APP dot repeat. So when all is said and done, that's what you get. You get colors that move down, and when they get to the bottom, they go back to the top. And you now have a program that will adjust reasonably well for a pleasing user experience with only changing the color. You get the correct waffle and you could get the correct size APP. All right, questions? Anything here that you think is magic or that I was trying to pull one over on you? So thumbs up, thumbs down, or horizontal?
Like you said before, with practice, I think we'll get used to this.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I did this and I redid it from demo 1 to try to put some sophistication into it.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you see, for instance, remember where we started. If you look at this program, there's something not so cool. I define colors here, and then I use the number 4 here, here, and here. That should set off an alarm in your head about, am I doing the best I can do? And you're not. Because here I could have figured out the number 4 by taking the length of this, and I could have gotten rid of the number 4 in all of those places. And that's basically what I did here. I got the number, obviously the number of things in the, another person. The number of things in the list is the same as the number of things in the deck.
Right.
So I'm safe. And that number will never change. So I can declare it visually in all caps to be constant.
Gotcha.
Python, quite frankly, doesn't know what to make out of a name of constants. PyCharm says if you're doing that, it should really be global. Or if you're within a function and you're creating a variable, make it lowercase. Now, color underscore Q is going to change. So although I could have named it in caps, it's not quite fair because it is changed, or as they used to say in C++, mutated by dot rotate, which means that a deck inherently has to be mutable. So although we started out with a list, by the time we got over here, if we hover, we don't have we started out with a tuple. Over here, when we hover, we see we now have something of type deck. Okay, so if you are joining us late, we started out more or less with this demo program here, which just does this, blinks the lights on and off. And we tried to make it more interesting to do this, where a couple of things happen. One is that the waffle is sized automatically based on the number of colors. The APP window is sized automatically based on the number of colors. And we use a new import to get a feature called deck, not DQ, which is what I started calling it. And the reason that we're using these decks is that they have a lot of cool properties. The one that we're interested in is rotate. So right now with 3 colors in the list, if you watch what happens, the waffle is 1 by 3, and the colors move down. When they get to the bottom, they go back to the top. And that's what a rotate is. So you're seeing the effect of line 24. All right, questions? Comments? Okay, so my plan is coming together. From the Monty Python sketch, and I forget from which sketch they leave or go into, but it doesn't matter. And now for something completely different. Not completely different, but it's time to move forward to GUI demo 5. And as I said previously, all of these demos up to date are listed in module 10. So, and there's also a description here of what they do. So we've looked this morning at taking a review of GUI demo 1. And now we created a similar thing, but instead of blinking the lights, there's a rotating pattern of lights. Now we're going to move on to something completely different. It's a key click event handler. And it is in your best interest to know that this section exists. So this will come up if you Google guizero tutorial, and you'll get this menu up on the top. And if we're going to talk about events, we're going to go to this tab, which is not a widget. Okay, there's no event in here. It's a separate tab in here. So we know about command equals for a push button. Well, that's not in this list. That is in this list. Push button. Command, give it a function name, and that's the function that will run when the button is pushed. Not every widget supports command equals, and not every event handler is supported that way either. Matter of fact, we just got done looking at, well, no, actually, the repeat. All right, let me not wander off there. Let's get back to events. So this should be a very interesting list to you. This says that you have access to all of these events. When a widget is clicked, whether it's a APP widget or a box widget, you can respond to a click with an event. You can also respond to double clicked. You can also respond to a left button pressed or released, a right button pressed or released, a key. That's why we're here, like keyboard key pressed and released. You can do a when mouse enters. So just by moving over something, you can trigger an event, or when mouse leaves. Now, this might set off bells in your head about different kinds of games you could play to highlight something without clicking, just moving over it. Or if you drag your mouse across a widget, that's a separate event. Or if the widget is resized, and I'm not sure what could be, I've never used that one. Certainly a window could be resized. You can change the size of widgets, but I don't know if that triggers it or not. Anyway, I haven't used it. It's up to you. But these look different. They don't look like command equals, and they don't look like dot repeat. They look like some widget and some event, when clicked, equals do this. Do this is the event handler. So this is the event with no parentheses that will trigger when this widget is clicked. And it's just going to print the widget was clicked. But there's more. Now that we triggered one of these events, we really need to know what element this applies to and what other information do we need. So in this case, we want to find out probably want to find out which widget was clicked. So we are given, let's look at this example. Excuse me for just a minute. Let's look at this example. Widget when clicked equals clicked. So this is my event handler. This event handler has a parameter called event_data. It can be called anything like event, value, Charlie, dog, doesn't matter. It's a parameter. That means that it is set by an argument. And the question is, who sets it? I didn't set it. I just said clicked. It turns out that it's guizero internally that when it calls this, it will provide something called event handler, event_data. And we need to understand what that object contains, particularly what are the properties of that object. And here's the list. So these are properties of this object. There is which widget was it that raised the event. Don't worry about this yet. You may have to someday, but don't worry about it yet. If there was a key involved, which key raised the event? What was the XY location relative to the widget where the event occurred? So within the widget, where was it clicked? Where were you within the display when the event happened? What was the width and height of the widget? And this is the brand new thing, only if you've updated to 1.4 or 1.04. Yeah, we just looked at that before. We can look at it again. So if you're updated to 1.40, you now have key code available to you. And that's what they're talking about here. So what is a key code and how is it different than a key? Well, it turns out that key is only smart enough to print keys that are printable. Well, that's silly. What kind of keys are not printable? Well, let's take a look into key code and see what we find. We find a whole bunch of things that are not printable. So there's no ABC 1, 2, 3 in here. There's things like the Alt left key as opposed to the Alt right key. They have separate key codes, which has a key symbol, and that's what I was looking for. I would have rather they gave me the key symbol than the key code, but I can look it up in this table. And then it tells you what it is. So all of these things are not printable, but they are keys. And now we know what the key code is. And given the key code, we can look it up. So one of the more valuable things I think are here are the arrow keys. So most keyboards have an up, down, left, right. And if you want to respond to the down key, you would need to know that it's key code 104. Your left key happens to be 100. Your down keypad. Oh, yeah. So this is actually on the keypad as opposed to the main part of the keyboard. So you can look through these to your heart's content and find out what all of these things map to. So these are just the arrow keys. These are the keys on the keypad. And of course, that has to do with numlock. So to get it to respond to the positioning things on the keypad, numlock has to be off. And you have tab keys and enter keys and left and right control keys. You've got a whole bunch of stuff. Now, this is a TK inter issue. And as we've said before, guizero is nothing other than a layer on top of TK inter. So this is all of those things. And I guess I haven't explored this link. Ugly. But okay, so here's a link. And this now shows you everything. So this shows you the letters of the alphabet and their key code. Upper and lower case have different codes, and pretty long list. All right, so we're not going to go wandering down there. So what we know, and what did I do? I got rid of my tutorial. So don't think of command equals. Don't think of dot repeat and dot after. Think of new stuff when you're thinking about what's in this section of the tutorial. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out in about 10-15 minutes how to use it. And that brings us to guizero demo 5. And let's again just see what it does. And then we'll look at the code. Well, that's pretty sparse, isn't it? Guess a letter. Guess what letter I pick by clicking a letter between A and Z. And notice I said notice I said lowercase a through Z. And that's not what I started doing, but it turned out to be a much better idea. So what I'm going to do, and you can't see it, but you're going to have to trust me, is I'm not touching the mouse and I'm not clicking the mouse. I'm hitting the letter B. Actually, I'm going to hit the letter M. And we get a pop-up. The pop-up says, guess a letter, title, icon, you lose, message, text, you picked M, pick one closer, maybe I should say pick a letter closer to Z. So I know that I have to move to the second half of the alphabet because my answer is closer to Z. So we've seen error pop-ups before, and this is just a slightly different use for them. This doesn't mean there's something wrong in the code. This means my guess wasn't good. And what you'll notice is I can't go back here and I can't type another letter until I acknowledge this pop-up. So now that okay, so we have to get closer. So what is closer? T is closer, right? It's not close enough to the end. Now, what I'm doing here is somewhat deliberate. I'm taking the range that I know and I'm getting about to the middle of it. So what I know here is I'm between T and Z. So what's between T and Z? Well, oh, I got it. I'm so happy. I get a different kind of pop-up. I get an info pop-up. You guessed it. The correct letter was U. Hit OK. And now I get a new kind of pop-up that we haven't used before. It's a yes/no pop-up. Do you want to play again? Well, trust me, yes will go back through the game, and no will collapse the application. So there's some magic here. And there's also some code. We're up to 65-ish lines of code. But let's do what we said we were going to do. We're going to write a goal. And the goal is to guess a letter between A and Z using a key click event handler. That's my goal. And that's enough in this case. Now I need to say, what is my layout, my static layout going to look like? And the answer is not much, right? So there it is. Create an APP widget, make it 400 by 130, put a somewhat larger text size on there of 18, and put a text widget inside APP that has a blank line, then guess what letter I picked, followed by another return, and click the letter between A and Z. So that just creates a very simple APP window. Even you can do that all by yourself, I believe. Now we get to the fancies. We're going to register our function handle underscore key underscore click. We're registering it to APP as an event when key pressed. So I don't care when the mouse is moved. I don't care when it's double clicked. I don't even care when the key is released. I want to respond to when a key is pressed. And by that, I mean any key. Anything on the keyboard that I can push down will cause an event. And that's it. Well, questions so far? The best is yet to come. So now I'm going to think about, well, what am I likely to use from here, both in terms of constants, variables, and imports. So guizero, duh, that's what I've been doing. If I'm going to pick something at random, then I probably need choice. And it turns out, after a little bit of Googling, that I also need a string library. So I decided what I want to do is I want an easy way of generating some kind of a data collection, I didn't much care which, of all of the lowercase characters, the real printable lowercase characters. So a little bit of Googling got me here. It says do string.ascii lowercase, and you will get returned to you a string. Now, is a string a data collection? Yes, it is. It's on your cheat sheet as a data collection. It is a collection of characters. Which characters? The lowercase characters. Prove it? I can prove it. I'm going to run the program. I'm going to look down here. And I'm going to see a string of the lowercase characters. So I've achieved my goal. And let's start by choosing a random letter. Well, I've got a string, and because that string can be treated as a data collection, I can pull a random thing out of there. Prove it? I can do that. I chose the letter V down here. That's my random choice. And hopefully, if I do it again, I'll choose a different random letter. All right, that works. So the only thing left is the event handler. And I think it's probably a good time for a break, both to give me a chance to rest my voice a little bit and give me a chance to figure out why the parrot is hollering. So after the break, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what ends up to be, a moderately sized event handler to actually play the game. So that's the goal. I see 9:55. So we're going to pick 10:05 as a good time to get back. We are going. Okay, welcome back. So we were about to take a look at the event handler for our key click program. And just as a refresher, this is a register statement. Just like command equals, it registers the name of a function with an event handler that is monitored by guizero, and that monitoring actually starts with .display. So behind your back, after you say app.display, one of the things that guizero has to do is find out if an event has happened. In this case, when a key is pressed. So that brings us back to here. And instead of having just empty parentheses, we now have the name of an object, which is not sacred. So event, my event, E, if you want to be sparse about it, Bob, if you like Bob, whatever you want. Well, this object has properties. And one of the properties that the object has, and it's the only time I'm going to use it here, is a key property. How do I know that? I know that by looking over here and finding out that key is a property, which is the key which raised the event. So I'm going to store that in a variable called key underscore clicked. And I'm going to use that in a bunch of places. So that's the last time I'm going to use event, the event object. And I'm going to cheat and I'm going to print out the chosen letter because it's not that interesting a game. Well, what do I need to know? I need to know if key clicked actually has something in it. So what kind of variable is key underscore clicked? It won't tell me. I think it's a string, but it's not going to tell me. I do know that if key underscore clicked comes back as empty, that I have clicked a non-printable key. So I learned that the hard way. So now I check if key clicked, that means is there something in there? And hold on just a minute, I need to sneeze. Sorry. If I have something in there, now I can do business. If I have nothing in there, let's follow the gray line down. I have an error. And it says only click A through Z. So anything that's not printable will get this error message. But that's not the only story. I also have to check, is the key clicked in the data collection letters? Well, what is letters again? It's a string. So if it's not found in the string of lowercase characters, we're not doing business. So it is printable, but it's something like a number. So that's not going to work either. Follow the gray line down. Only click A through Z. I told you. You're not listening. I told you. Only click A through Z. So what do we know now? We now know at line 28 that we have a key click that is between lowercase a and lowercase z. So those are the first two qualifications that we make. So this should begin to look familiar. We got an if else. So what does this mean? If key clicked is greater than the chosen letter, how does that work? Well, what does it mean to compare letters with greater than, less than, equal? Well, if a character is greater than another character, it appears after it in a dictionary. So it's called a dictionary sort. So that means that my guess was to the Z side of the actual chosen letter. And that means I need to pick one closer to A. So I'm going to say that in an error pop-up. On the other hand, if it's less than, I have to go closer to Z. Is that a capital Z? Yeah, I have to go closer to Z because I was short alphabetically from the chosen letter. Well, think hard. If it's not greater than and it's not less than, what is it?
Equal to.
Did I hear an answer?
You said if it's not greater than and if it's not less than, that it's got to be equal to.
Yeah. So if it's equal to it, that's the else. I only have to do these two checks. If I can't pass this test and I can't pass this test, then I have the else. And the else says, woohoo, do an info pop-up because you got it right. You guessed it. The correct letter was key clicked. Or chosen letter, doesn't much matter. So here's the new one. And it's just a pop-up. How do you find out about these? You go to the guizero tutorial and you look up in the guizero tutorial pop-ups, and you find stories about all of these. So again, valuable, should be bookmarked, should be referred to. And if you really want to learn a lot about guizero, read this, in your free time. So put up a yes/no dialogue with the title, guess a letter, with the text, play again, and it'll have a question mark. And under that question mark will be yes, no. If you press yes, then reply will be true. If you exit out or press no, then reply will be false. Notice it says reply will be a Boolean. So it's either yes or no. If it is yes, then I can choose another letter. That's why this is global. And that's why I had to write a global statement over here, because I need to preserve this choice through different key clicks. And I need to reset, I need to put in another choice if I choose yes. If I don't choose yes, I'm going to do an app.destroy, which will collapse the window. And that's the story. So, any questions or comments, or can you go over it again about what we're doing here in this event handler? And this is out there in D2L and as guizero demo 5. We good?
Good here.
Okie doke. So let's talk more about event handlers, because we don't necessarily, or we haven't discussed the whole story. So let's go back here. And I want to point out certain widgets to you. And I'm going to start with a slider. And I'm going to go down to okay, it doesn't really explain there what I thought it would explain, but it does have it in an example. All right, so what have we done here? We've set a command equals on a slider. That means that if and when the value was changed, and every change you make, every click you make to change it will trigger the event, then run this handler. All right, what is this about? We haven't talked about that yet. That is the value that will be passed as an argument into this parameter. So every time it's triggered, the guizero internals will provide a slider value, which you can put in a text box. Sounds straightforward. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's nice that they put that here. So if you put command equals onto a slider, which we haven't done, we put it on a button, but you can also put it on a slider. You must have one parameter that will automatically receive a string containing the value of the slider called slider underscore value. Now, since sliders create integers, why do we receive a string? And I don't know, but we do. Now, it turns out that slider.value is an integer, but if it's passed this way, then it becomes a string. And if you need it as an integer, you have to convert it. So this has to do with applying command equals to a slider. So remember that. Put that into your thinking someplace. That's that one. Let's look at one we haven't looked at before, and that's a combo. So let's find out some things about a combo. Well, it supports command, so command equals is on the table. Says the name of the function to call when a different option is selected. This function must have either 0 or 1 argument. So 0 is okay, but if it has an argument, then the current value of the combo will be passed as an argument into the parameter in the parentheses. So that has to do with, looking at an example, combo command equals you chose. You chose has a parameter, and that can then be used to say what you chose. So there's a little game. If you choose the tiny goblet, you chose wisely. If not, you chose poorly. This will always return a string also. But wait, there's more. Another one we haven't looked at yet, but we will next week, I think. A list box. The name of a function to call when a different option is selected. This function must have either 0 or 1 argument. If it has 1 argument, the current value will be given. It will be passed as from an argument internal to guizero to a parameter in your event handler. So let's see if they give an example. Command is change color. Change color accepts a parameter called value. You're picking a color off of here and displaying it in a text widget here. Again, list boxes will provide this information in a string. Okay. Events, well, we just talked about events. That's not under widget, but it's under here. Events will provide this event object that has all of these parameters. And quite frankly, maybe we'll do that if we have a chance. It's interesting to look at these parameters in PyCharm in debug mode, because that's where you discover all the things that they're not telling you, like how much is in this TK event object. So we've already discussed the fact that we get past event data and we can pull whatever we want out of it. Last but not least is my favorite, the waffle. Well, what do waffle events mean? So a waffle takes command equals. And if you're interested in playing whack-a-mole, this is very important to you. The name of a function to call when the waffle is clicked. The function must either take 0 or 2 arguments. If it has 2 arguments, then the coordinates, the XY pair of the pixel clicked will be given. So the X is first, the Y is second. What might come as a surprise to you is that the 0, 0 is in the upper left-hand corner, not in the lower left-hand corner, and certainly not in the center. So that's the way the cells are numbered. They do start from 0. And fortunately, they fixed a bug where if you clicked not in a waffle, it would return to you 1 more than the size of the waffle. That was unfortunate, but that was fixed a long time ago. So the next exciting thing we've learned about waffles is that individual cells are clickable. And that's cool. While we're here, we should also note in properties, all of these things can be used in a set or a get. So we can actually change Dottie. We can change it from a circle to a square, from a square to a circle. We can change, of course, the color of individual pixels. and other stuff. I guess we can change the padding then. So again, this sheet's invaluable if you ignore the fact that they can't spell color correctly, because Raspberry Pi Foundation comes out of England. Alrighty, so that's what's there. So just be aware that event handlers can use optional parameters. Some cases they are, some cases they're not. Read the documentation. All right. Any questions? So last thing I wanted to cover is back in D2L, back in here. I want to look at the practice for box and sliders, which was just updated. Okay, then. And this might look kind of familiar. Obviously, I got stuck on the idea of coolant temperature and lights to tell you whether or not your motor was overheated. The difference with this is, and that logic is the same, you know, let's get the slider temperature and then say what color to make this, but also provide a text field down here to say different things. The difference is that this display is organized in some other way other than just top to bottom. Because top to bottom, while it's simple, is not the best user experience in all cases. So I've chosen, and I'm showing it to you visually, 2 columns. Here's a column, here's a column. In this column, there's a 1-cell waffle and a text field. In this column, there's a text field and a vertical slider. So that's what we have to be looking for. The logic here is pretty much the same old stuff, but the layout is what we want to focus on. And here's the code. So, gee, this is already several years old. But let's talk through it. Let's say we were just starting this process and we wanted to, as the cliche goes, put our ducks in order. So here's the goal. We're going to practice boxes and sliders. We're going to do the old engine coolant monitor. We're going to use the slider for the temperature, a waffle for an indicator, and we're going to say we're going to be green if we're less than 220, red if we're above 220, and then a message that says normal or overheated. And the color of the slider will also have a normal and overheated range to it. So these are things that I think are going to be important, and they're all going to be constants. The high limit is 220, so that follows that. The indicator, which is a waffle, is a single cell, so that means it will be in 0, 0. And I wrote that as a tuple to kind of enforce the idea of the parentheses and it being an XY pair. My OK color is green, my no good color is red, my OK message is normal, my no good message is overheated. I don't think there's anything too surprising in the event handler, other than here is an odd time when we accepted a value and from the slider and convert it, we have to convert it to an integer to do math. But I'm not as interested in that as I am in the layout. So I've sized this up to look pretty. I've set my text size up a bit. I've used a box as a spacer on the top. And now what I want to do is I want to create a box to hold the content of the rest of the display. So I'm going to create that box, call it box 1. And looking at the numbers that I have available here, I'm going to make it 350 and 320. So it fits nicely inside of my APP window. And then I'm going to put 2 boxes where inside of box 1. Well, I think I'll call the one on the left box 1 left. And I think I'll align it to the left. And I think that its width should be, oh, okay, the width is not the same. All right, so the width is something that I decided looked pretty, and then box 1 right has the rest of the 350. So the 2 widths add up to 350. The heights are the same height as the box in which it's contained. And now I have an outside box divided left and right. So that gives me what I need for the rest of it. So now I can go and fill the left box. Well, what's in the left box? Well, there's a waffle in there. Where? In box 1 left. Underneath it, there's a text message with the legend off in it. How do I know it's underneath it? Well, if I don't tell it where to align it, then the alignment is top to bottom, horizontally centered. So that is my default, and that's what it looks like. The right box at the top on 2 lines says coolant temperature, and underneath it, there's a slider in the right box. Horizontal is false, which means it's vertical, starting at 250, ending at 100, because that puts the 100 at the bottom, which in my mind is more the way that a temperature thing should go. So visually, I'm going at the bottom from 100 to the top at 250. And I made it tall enough to fit comfortably in there. This is my only event handler. There's no push button here, so I have to hang my event handler on the slider, which makes sense. And when I go back to my event handler, I provided this because I could. And the only problem is that I have to convert it to an integer to use it. And then I'm left with very little. If the temperature is less than the high limit, then everything's okay. Else, everything's not okay. So okay means set the color of the waffle, set the color on the slider, and set the message. Not okay, of course, the same things, or the no good state. So that's why I went through the effort of defining these up here so that it's obvious if I want to go back and change something where these are and where they're used. So that's that practice program. Done as a practice program, there's more stuff around it. There's, this is what I'm trying to do. And there's a video and there's source code. So practice programs have all of that for your learning and entertainment purposes. So any questions about this program that you want to talk about? We're good? Cool. Okay. So the last thing I'd like to leave you with, and let's see, I think the whiteboard never worked right for us, did it? Oh, but there is a whiteboard in Windows. So we'll use that. Okay. Yeah, got it. Go away. No. Okay. So what I want to talk to you about for just briefly, a few minutes, looks like we'll finish early, which is a good thing. When we create these GUI programs, at least at this level, we're following something that people like to call MVC. And if you had to guess, you probably couldn't. And the order is weird. So let's talk. It stands for model, view, controller. Make this bigger, wider. There we go. So one of the things that we're trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve a separation between these different aspects of our GUI application. And different development environments do this differently, and some of them do a better job than others. So we need to talk about what these things are. What do they mean by model? They mean the data and data manipulation. So your data and anything you're going to do with it, that is the model for this program. Now, that means the data could be in text files, it could be in a pickle file, it could be in a database, it could be local variables, wherever it is, that's part of it. The view is simply what you see. And the controller really is the thing that ties it together. Most of that, it would be done in event handlers. So the model, oh, I drew a double arrow. Maybe we can fake it off with this. Yeah. Go wider again. So the controller ties together the model and the view. So it's fair to say that you could describe any GUI that you're trying to make, or any real program. I mean, if it was a text-based program, so your view is composed of print and input statements. Here in a GUI environment, we have a lot more to deal with. Now, the model, whether you're text-based or GUI-based, really should be the same. So whether you're rolling dice and printing, you rolled a 5, or you're creating a GUI and you have to display a dice face that looks like 5. The idea of a dice having 6 sides, 1 through 5, and the idea of rolling, that's a model issue. View issue is where we have all the UI, UX things to worry about, unless we're doing text-based programming, in which case we don't have much to worry about. It's print and input. And controller becomes a big deal with event handlers, which is how GUI programs work, that really work based on event handlers. So, I'd like you to think about when you're developing applications, what part of this are you working on? It turns out that the more strictly you can separate these in your code, the easier it is to make changes. So if I need to change my view, but my data doesn't change, so I need to rebuild the layout, and then I need to make sure that the event handlers handle it properly. If all I'm doing is reorganizing the elements of the view, they still have the same name, then the event handlers don't have to be changed. If I'm going from a Python GUI to a Java GUI, the view has to be built completely differently, and the controllers will look different. The data, on the other hand, pretty much stays the same. So if you're going to be taking programming 2, you'll get to see a Java GUI system called Java FX. And I'm not up to date on the content of that course, but I'm pretty sure, well, I'm not that sure. I think it covers the version of Java, or the style of Java FX, that provides a very clean separation between the view and the controller. There's something else interesting here. We build our views in guizero by typing code. So everything that we create has to get typed. There are, and Java FX has an example of it, there are GUI-based view builders. So JavaFX supports something called Scene Builder, and it's a drag and drop GUI builder. So I get, and if I would have thought about this a little ahead, I would have an example for you, which maybe we'll spend a little bit of time and try to find one. So you can actually drag and drop elements like your sliders and your push buttons and lots of other things. You can drag and drop them into an editor, a graphical editor, and behind your back, it generates code. In my opinion, the right way of doing that in JavaFX is the system where it generates kind of XML, but it's actually called FXML because it's JavaFX specific. And then they also clearly break out the controller into separate parts of the program. So they will say, based on what you did, here's your controller here, here's the start of the controller, and go ahead and build it. So I think that thinking about MVC when you work on these things and thinking about how do I separate the M from the V from the C will serve you well. So that's why I wanted to talk to you about that. Questions? Okay, so I'm going to pause the